for this year in the bond. We're proposing local assistance funding for the drinking water, wastewater, and recycling projects. We're going to use our existing guidelines and criteria and our experience from our existing programs so that we can expedite those. We have a lot of experience there, and we're going to be getting our draft guidelines out next month and have them approved prior to the funds being available on July 1st so we can start getting them out the door. We'll do all of the outreach and hearings required, which Secretary Laird talked about, and more. We just agreed to do consultation meetings with tribes yesterday at a tribal meeting I was at yesterday. And we'll tune them up, as Mr. Favarini-Sorba said. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. For the stormwater and the groundwater cleanup projects, and this gets to Senator Wolk's point from earlier, we're going to need more time and staff to establish the criteria. These are new projects, and they do need to be ones where we think about how to leverage money, just as you've been discussing. From my experience at US EPA when I was in the federal government, you know, one Superfund site could eat up all 800 million in a minute. I could have spent all 800 million many times over in LA easily. I had $4 billion to spend on wastewater and other things when I was there. It goes very fast at the local level. And so we have to think carefully about how we find that sweet spot where the state money is doing exactly what you were all talking about. So how do we leverage that best bang for the buck, pop for the drop in doing it? And how do we prioritize disadvantaged communities in that as well? There's going to be a lot of competition for that money, and we want to be very thoughtful about it. We don't want to sit on our hands. We want to get it out the door. We want to make sure we get it out the door thoughtfully, and we've had the chance to really talk with people about it. The first set of funding, we've done that a lot. We know it a lot. We're sort of ready, steady, go on that in some cases, and we just need to figure out how do we make sure we're leveraging and helping disadvantaged communities and encouraging the kind of consolidation that you all talked about earlier that we can do much faster than figuring out how to do it with the groundwater and the stormwater money, which is no disrespect or lack of intention to get that money out the door to do good. We just want to do it thoughtfully. Part of what we're doing in terms of program improvements there is we're going to have a single application for drinking water, wastewater, and recycled water. And frequently communities, they're doing all three. They're doing their water system. Sometimes you've got different jurisdictions or different communities working together. They can also apply together. We want to figure out how do we look at a community and figure out what their needs are and match our loan and grant funds in a fair way, again, to be fair, but to also get the best bang for the buck. And that should really be helping. And we'll comply with all of the other requirements in the bond and that you suggest, and we do put our stuff up on the website. We'll be working with the Resources Department very closely on that. We do performance reports, and we put up how we do, warts and all, on our website. It's fairly unusual. I haven't actually seen that before, and we'll be putting this up as well. And then I just want to close by saying something that you all talked about already this morning, which is despite what we've done here, despite the many, many people we're going to be able to help across the state with Proposition 1, when it comes to drinking water, there are a lot more decisions to be made. I spoke with this committee about this as we were going through the move of the drinking water program. The O&M issue that was raised, and no doubt will be raised in public comment, is a very big one. There are big decisions, as Ms. Hannock said, to be made about how to pay for that, how to allocate that, how we figure out how to do that. But with the human right to water and its historic passage here, it behooves all of us to try and figure out how we're going to do that. And so I know we'll be back here with you, both with ideas that you have and ideas the administration comes up with in response to our conversations that are laid out in the 8 pages, to figure out how do we actually help not just regulate systems under our jurisdiction, which is what the law requires right now. That's systems over 15. Instead, how are we going to figure out how to actually get safe and affordable drinking water, not just to those communities, but also the ones below 15 and on domestic wells that right now we don't have any jurisdiction over. I'm not saying we need to get jurisdiction or create another regulatory scheme. I'm just saying collectively we've got to figure out what to do next. With that said, this is just a tremendous gift, and I think we're going to have a lot to be proud of in the next few years. That's going to be in the faces and the hearts of people who don't know any of us, but are going to finally have safe drinking water coming out their taps versus paying exorbitant rates for lousy water and also buying bottled water, which is the situation we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Marcus. Thank you, Secretary Laird. A lot of information, and I think we would all agree with you. These bond dollars are indeed a gift, and we have great responsibility to make sure they are used as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, and that you're probably hearing from the committee that we'd actually like to partner with you as these decisions are made. So, as I said, you know the questions, and you'll hear many of them reiterated by any number of committee members. I'll start off by responding to your very thoughtful explanation as to why, as you use the example of the project in your and Senator Manning's district, that it's necessary for us to take action so that the message is communicated clearly to the locals so that they can take care of their business so that we can complete the transaction and the project can finally get going. If that's the case, and I don't doubt it, why wasn't, because now we're up against some deadlines and it's being expedited, why wasn't this brought to us 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago so they could have had that commitment from us and be able to move forward so many years back?
Actually, I know that it was an active discussion last year in the budget process and that we supported it getting out the door last year in the budget process. The administration was on record in support. So I think there was a desire to do that. So, but frankly, we're where we are now.
My memory was that that was a really last minute request, but we'll let that be his history. And then,
good luck with doing that.
with regard to the audits and reviews, all well and good, and a very important part of accountability, but clearly after the fact. And again, as you've heard from many committee members, we'd actually like to be considered as an equal branch of government and have some say in how this is unfolding, and in particular with regard to potential reductions in capital outlay and in local assistance for the administration to be able to increase state operations. And Senator Wolkin underscored that earlier. And your time in the Assembly isn't that long ago that I would imagine this might strike a familiar chord.
Yes, and the water director has been chafing for this moment.
Chafing? I don't know.
It's called a lateral pass.
Yeah, right. He may be chafed, but I don't know.
But not of him.
Thank you. I'm Mark Callan, Director of the Department of Water Resources. If I could just make a couple of comments while I've got the mic for a moment.
Oh, I don't think Secretary Laird's going to grab it back anytime soon.
I don't think so either. Let me just say this. If I sound offensive in anything I say in the next couple of moments, I'm really not. I'm very open to a close examination of the way that we administered our responsibilities in flood management and administration of Prop 1E in particular. And we're always looking to find ways to improve the way that we do our jobs. So I'm very open to working with you all and to constructive criticism on how we can do our jobs better. But just a very brief rollback in history here. Back in the mid-2000s, of course, we saw a big shift in flood management in California. The Department of Water Resources, I think, very prominently issued an important report, a flood warnings report back in 2005, which drew a lot of highlight to the crisis we were facing in our flood management system, just due to decades of under-expenditure, neglect, and deterioration of our existing flood system in light of increasing risks due to climate change. So that was an important moment in time. Of course, the tragedy of Hurricane Katrina also helped raise consciousness about the risk of flood management, and we saw a reaction to that, just as we saw in 2014 to 3 years of drought, historic legislation that will help us in the future manage water. Back in 2006, 2007, we also had a moment in time, which I think was extremely important for changing the way that we're approaching flood management in California. Thanks to the legislature and the vote of the people, of course, we did end up with significant funds to spend to make a first investment in our flood management systems. We also had important legislation, flood management reform legislation passed by the legislature in 2007. So part of that, of course, was the direction to prepare a Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which took some time to do. During those intervening years, of course, we tried to strike a balance between spending money on low-hanging fruit and reserving money so that we had significant funds to spend once the plan was complete. And we'd had all the public input and negotiation around development of that plan. So that was one of the reasons that we weren't leaping out the door to spend flood monies in 2006. 2008 came along, and we saw the earth somewhat shift beneath our feet in terms of the financial downturn, which affected the state's ability to sell bonds and actually fund our commitments, our cost shares, but maybe more importantly, also affected the local agencies, local communities' ability to raise those matching funds, which are necessary in order for us to make our commitments. So we saw a significant slowdown in advancement of local flood project proposals during 2008, 9, and the following years. On top of that, we saw a shift in federal policy, basically, where we were less likely to see funds coming through federal appropriations and the Army Corps of Engineers processes to provide federal cost shares for projects. So I think, as you heard in the previous panel, this is a significant policy issue for California. If I remember correctly, the flood legislation actually directs the Department of Water Resources to maximize federal cost share. So what does that mean in today's reality of less federal appropriation and less expectation for future federal appropriation? So I think that's a policy issue we all need to grapple with. I would say if there's one lesson to be learned in our now going on 10 years of experience with this legislation, it's that momentum is everything in keeping projects in the development stages, coming up through the pipelines, raising the local cost shares that are necessary to implement projects. Starting and stopping is horribly inefficient. Local agencies have many hurdles to cross to complete planning processes, to get appropriate permits, to raise local cost shares. And without the very clear commitment that state funds are available at the end of that process, it's difficult for those agencies to maintain momentum. So I'm sorry if I've gone on too long here. Let me note that I believe you all have a letter that was signed by 5 urban agencies sent to the Department of Water Resources back in November, I believe, which really speaks to the need for clear availability, a clear signal that state funding is available for them to continue their headstrong work to get projects ready for state funding. And we do have some examples of some of those projects that will likely undergo starts and stops if funding is not committed to sooner rather than later. The bigger issue, though, I think, is just the matter of keeping these local planning processes alive and healthy and moving forward so that this year, next year, we will have a variety of flood projects that we can fund and use our state funding wisely for. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Director Cowan. I'm going to let some of my colleagues address some further questions to you. I just want to switch over to Prop 1 real quickly. And I thank you, Chair Marcus, for your comments with regard to your sincere concern for clean and safe drinking water for everyone in California and the basic human right element of it, which of course was in legislation the governor did sign. So that's already in statute. We all agree on that. Do we have an understanding or a vision, a goal as to where we want to get to if the number is approximately 1 million Californians can't drink their tap water now? Where do we want to be in 5, 10 years? And then also, if we've got 69 million in the governor's proposal for safe drinking water, I think in what's before us right now, how far does that piece of it get us? And again, what is the vision?
You know, it's hard to say how far that gets us. I couldn't say off the top, but we could try and work on those numbers and go back to how we came up with what we thought we could responsibly get out the door this year, knowing that we need to be working with communities to also help them be able to get these funds, including trying to find innovative ways to also help those larger communities that are helping the smaller communities as an incentive. I think how far we can get and setting a goal actually depends on the tools we have and some of the public policy decisions that have yet to be made. I would say we want to help as many as we can, as fast as we can. I don't have a sense of how far we can get under the existing authorities. I know we can get pretty far in the short run because we know there are people that are there who just haven't had the wherewithal to go for loans, but say they have the managerial and the technical feasibility capacity, they just didn't have the financial capacity. So we feel we can make a pretty big dent with these additional resources. But until we are able to get enough resources to be able to help subsidize more the operation and maintenance, a lot of those people we won't be able to get to. That estimate comes out of our contaminated water reports. That has to do with an estimate that includes all those people we don't have any jurisdiction over in the smaller systems as well as the individual domestic wells. So it's a little hazy, and to get to them will definitely take legislation on the part of this body to either give us the tools or the obligation or the authority to be able to get there. There are hundreds of thousands of people and hundreds of communities that are currently within our system that we know we can help. So we're trying to target how do we get to the ones we know we can help in the short run, and somewhere in those hundreds is a number that's reasonable in the first year, second year, third year as we ramp up. But we still need to be able to figure out, you know, each community has a different pathway to the problem they're in, and each of them is going to have a pathway out of it. We've tried to struggle with, is there one way we could just do it all really quickly? And as soon as you talk to people, it's kind of fraught with peril because each situation is different. In the course of this next year, and this is what's in the A pages, we will be working closely with you and stakeholders to figure out what realistically can we actually get done quickly. So I know that's not giving you a number today, but I'm happy to work with the number with the what-ifs attached to figure out what kind of metric we may want to set for ourselves. Right now, there's a pretty low bar. So I'm confident we'll get a lot done within 1 year, but not nearly enough. So it's something we really have to work through.
And do we have any way to be certain that the problem's not getting any worse as we begin to spend these monies? Have we contained it, or are we going to see more and more people suffering as we begin to chip away at it?
I think that's always possible. And what ends up happening is we discover new contaminants and new health threats all the time that we go to address. I mean, the numbers of communities that aren't meeting their maximum contaminant limits goes up exponentially when you add the arsenic standard that EPA did over 10 years ago, I guess, when I was at EPA, and people argued that that wasn't anywhere near low enough. That was, MCLs are done through a combination of economic and technical feasibility. People were arguing for a much lower number than the 10. It dropped from 50 to 10. That added hundreds of communities to the not getting safe drinking water list, and the Chrome 6 listing, where people have similar not high enough to high kind of arguments, is going to add hundreds more. And so those two are pretty expensive treatment models. So I think we're going to be finding those kinds of things all the time as we start getting to other contaminants. I think we have a sense of the universe of small communities that are struggling, at least within our system, and hopefully we haven't missed anyone. We've probably missed, it's a total estimate when it comes to the under 15, but when it just comes to hundreds of thousands of people, we have a sense of where they are, and we probably know that universe.
With regard to the state, making the problem any worse with these recent revelations and now the address of it by the EPA with regard to the potential, if not fact, of contamination of aquifers throughout the state, is that discomforting to you?
Well, yeah, everything's discomforting to me when it comes to contaminants. It comes from years of working in this, in the field. I mean, that's one where we have to see where, is there really actual contamination that's affecting people that are drinking water now? We're trying to get to protect, I mean, the legislation that you all passed on SB4 gives us tools we never had before to be able to assess the groundwater basins and also to protect basins that are likely to become drinking water sources off into the future. I'm more focused at the moment. I'm not focused on that. I think we're dealing with that. But you have a much bigger number of people that we know right now are drinking contaminated water, and that's where my top priority is.
All right. Thank you. So Senator Wolk, followed by Senator Nielsen and Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will
Senator
be brief.
Pavley.
I would just like to talk to both of you about the 1A monies and the proposal. What concerns me, the 10 years, the 2 years, everything you described about your particular project, and Lord knows I have had plenty in my district because I represent part of the Central Valley, and what you described, Mark, is true of transportation projects as well. It takes years, you have to pull in different sources of funding, But there's a system in transportation. There's a list, essentially, to simplify. When the bond funds and funds become available, they go down the list. And it starts from the grassroots and goes to the CTC, the MTC, and then the CTC. So that has a logic to it. With this, and with this proposal, I mean, is there a list of projects? Where are the bypass projects that were proposed in 2006? Is there a list of projects? Is there a plan for the expenditure of that remaining money? I mean, that's what I'm struggling with. And then I'll...
Well, if I could respond to that part of the question, yeah, I think there is a plan, and it's the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. The budget proposals that we've put forward are consistent with the priorities and the spending plan that's laid out in this plan in terms of the basic categories. No, there's not a specific list of projects. Caltrans has it pretty easy in that regard because you're right, they have a very discrete system that boils up specific projects that are prioritized and funded. We have much more work with local agencies that actually do the implementing of flood programs as opposed to transportation projects. So it's a little messier for us to get to that specific kind of list of projects. Let me just say that I have no desire to stretch this out over 10 years. The reason for the request for a 10-year appropriation is simply because we know the problem is much bigger than the funding we have available, including all of the remaining 1E funding. So we don't want to leave a dime on the table. We're desire to get the money out as quickly as we can, consistent with the priorities that we've laid out in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and we continue to engage through the Flood Board and others on what the appropriate priorities and specific projects should be. I will also note, I don't think this came out in earlier testimony, that our proposal also includes a proposal that we would issue annual reports to the legislature that describe past funding, what our proposed annual funding would be, what projects would be funded, and our future plans as well. So we expect that kind of interaction with the legislature and look forward to other ways that we can work closer together in order to assure that your voices are heard as we make those decisions over the 10-year period or shorter, hopefully.
And the request that is, the additional request is for flexibility, to allow you flexibility over the same period of time to distinguish them, to change funding, switch funding between capital outlay projects, local assistance, and state operations. State operations being the least amount of money, 15% currently. Most of it is local. Rural areas, urban areas, local assistance.
To clarify, our desire, again, is just to have the ultimate flexibility when we get down to the last millions of dollars to be able to shift it in the right direction. If it makes our job easier and your job easier, we can commit that any flexibility will only be in one direction. So it would be from state ops towards local assistance programs.
I see.
That's our real interest here.
And to satisfy the most skeptical of my Central Valley and Delta colleagues, is there any reason to believe that these bond funds are being held back or being proposed in this fashion to fund the BDCP?
I have no idea where those sort of proposals or suggestions would come from. Any expenditure of 1E funds would never be for any permit term relative to state or federal project operations. So again, not knowing a specific allegation to respond to, I would say that no, there's no opportunity to use these 1E funds to advance the Bay Delta Conservation Plan permitting process.
Thank you. I have one other question, and that goes to the Proposition 1 proposal. And Chair Marcus, maybe you can respond to this. One of the things I'm looking at is whether or not on the Prop 1 proposals it would, of the money that goes out early, it would make more sense to focus on existing rather than new programs.
Right.
In the LAO's effectively implementing the 2014 water bond, there's a section here that deals with enhanced stream flows, which you were a strong advocate for, and was controversial, certainly. There are issues raised in terms of, or cautions raised by the LAO that really need to be looked at, I think. The concerns about paying excessive costs for water transfers, the concern that maybe they won't produce additional benefits, and the need to ascertain all of that, and the need not to duplicate regulatory requirements. I think it's a thoughtful question, thoughtful series of recommendations. My question is, with respect to the Prop 1 proposals, we won't have an opportunity to really go through a lot of these concerns if we push that money out the door right away, as opposed to June. So I'm wondering what you think about that, as well as this notion of maybe we focus on existing programs and hold on the new.
Well, I don't, I
least for
probably
the pot.
should turn to Kevin, in whose bailiwick, or maybe it's Wildlife Conservation Board bailiwick, so
Let me just clarify an overarching assumption, and then maybe let Kevin talk about the specifics of in-stream flows. But just for clarity, at this point in time, the administration's, Matt Almy, Department of Finance, at this point in time, the administration's proposal for an acceleration early special legislation is for the Prop 1E appropriation only. We're not suggesting that the water bond funds be appropriated earlier. This is the proposal, and it was set up in the 8 pages, was for special legislation for 1E.
I thought it was 533.
Good to know.
Okay, I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wilk. Senator Nielsen.
Secretary Laird and Senator Laird, you are the former and you'll always be the latter. Thank you for being here today, and
that's the quote after.
and your yes, your affirmation and including storage. Am I to assume that what I quoted from the ballot argument remains the governor's and the administration position, that storage is a part of the program here, surface storage?
Absolutely.
No. Okay. And it may be needed to be a question for someone else, the treasurer, but do you have any idea when the bonds may be put out?
Actually, the Water Commission is setting up the process to be ready to receive the, any potential projects, and Director Cowan can speak to that.
Director Cowan, do they have a time schedule for that?
There's a time schedule that's built into the Prop 1 language itself, which calls for the Water Commission to complete their regulation process to help define how to measure public benefits for the purposes of deciding which projects would be funded. And that deadline is December of 2016. So I would expect the Water Commission to consider proposals after that and make awards in 2017.
And has the treasurer been engaged in this at all, or are they just benign until such time as you submit something to the treasurer? You have no cause to know what's going on in the treasurer's mind, but does anybody even have a clue? Yeah.
I defer to finance.
Well, that'll be another, well, please.
Can you repeat the question again?
Well, the treasurer is going to be a key player here with the letting of the bonds.
Sure.
Any idea when that first letting of the bonds may be?
Well, we fund bonds and sell bonds kind of based on cash needs of the project. I think in part of some of the earlier testimony, there's kind of a process where you award and commit the funds. Then sometimes it takes until the projects are actually completed until the cash is needed to go back to the project. So we work with the departments to get their cash flow projections based on what they expect the schedule is going to be. And we would expect as the bonds start becoming implemented, there would be a ramp up of the selling of the bonds over time. Is that a...
Senator, let me presuppose what you were trying to get at.
Yes.
You're really trying to get at Would there be a potential for any surface storage project to be delayed because the bonds weren't sold in time or the treasurer wasn't engaged?
Well, yeah, that's primary, Secretary Laird, but other things too, that the expectation, other things are coming out of that bond too. So it's not just my exclusive concern about surface, although that's preeminent on my mind, of course.
Because I think that we would just be ready to say that we would anticipate that sale of bonds would not delay the schedule for a project for surface storage.
Yeah, that's a fair, that's exactly right.
Well, that's very helpful to me, for sure. Let me shift now then to the board. The drinking water program fee, the board is going to be dealing with. Possible fee increases, is that correct?
You mean?
Under the new drinking water program, fee increases, that I understand that there was a shift from the Department of Public Health to the board for those, their responsibilities, and now the board's looking for emergency regulations. Not aware of that?
Which language is it? What am I missing?
The question came into me from a local entity, and that's why I was inquiring.